Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Min Sun-hee with our group of foreign journalists. Welcome to the show.
Good to be back then.
Well, campaigning for the presidential race scheduled for May 9th is in full swing here in Korea. And in this edition of Foreign Correspondents, we take a look at the rallies and the policies of some of the contenders. At the stroke of midnight on April 17th, official campaigning for Korea's 19th presidential election kicked off. A total of 15 candidates have registered for the race, the longest tally in the country's history. Candidates have 22 days to campaign until Election Day on May 9th. With an official announcement from the National Election Commission declaring the winner, the newly elected president's term begins immediately as the top office is currently unoccupied.
짧은 기간이지만 비상한 각오로 철저한 준비를 통해 정확하고 완벽하게 선거를 관리하여 국민의 뜻이 선거 결과에 그대로 반영될 수 있게 하겠습니다.
The election comes after former President Park Geun-hye's impeachment, which is why public interest in the race is higher than ever. According to a poll announced on the 14th, 9 out of 10 respondents said they would most certainly cast a vote in this election.
대한민국의 기틀을 새롭게 다질 지도자를 뽑는 이번 선거에 국민 여러분께서는 꼭 참여하여
Meanwhile, global media outlets are also closely watching the presidential race to see where public sentiment is headed. Japan's financial newspaper, the Nikkei, reported that following former President Park's arrest, a Liberal Party victory, unseating conservatives from power, could become reality. The New York Times noted the incoming president would take office at a time when tensions on the Korean Peninsula are particularly high and reported in detail on the two leading candidates and their backgrounds. Singapore's The Straits Times reported clarifying suspicions may be necessary, but that the top two candidates are overly focused on finding fault with each other. Who will become Korea's next leader? We sit down now with our panel members to discuss the upcoming 19th presidential election. Right. Now, Frank, is this your first coverage of a presidential race? I'm going to assume no.
No. This is my third go-round, I guess, for a presidential election here in South Korea. You know, it's always very, very interesting to see the different sort of strategies and election and campaigning that goes on here in South Korea. It's a lot different than what happens in Canada, and I think probably in the United States. It's fun.
It is. I do kind of get into the fact that it does seem like a little bit more peppy and fun because you have these dancers who like dance for a certain number candidate, and the fact that candidates even are attached to their ballot numbers is interesting. So, you know, when you see signs and banners out on the streets, they'll say like 1, 2, 3, or 4, denoting which candidate it is and their ballot order. This is something that doesn't happen in the States. The ballot order is insignificant. It is all about the person and the name.
It's fun, and I think it's great material for us journalists. Especially for TV or radio, to have this music and this lively campaign. It's great, it's colorful.
Yeah, and the original music too. They make up songs for the candidates and then they'll have like kids and sometimes ajumas dancing in front of the stage before the candidate comes up to speak. It's really fun.
I see. Frank, in a recent survey by the National Election Commission, respondents selected appearance and ability as the most important factors in choosing a candidate, followed by policies and campaign pledges. What do you believe is an important factor to consider in choosing a candidate as a voter?
Well, I think it's really difficult. I would like to say ability is the most important thing, but it's not like we get to do a trial run of the candidates and see how they would perform on the job. As we learned with Park Geun-hye, successful campaigning and successful politicking are much different than successful governing, right? And so, you know, my feeling would be, you know, look at the track record in terms of their governing.
we are a visual culture, and a lot of these campaigns play out on television and in front of our screens, and so I understand that, but there needs to be kind of a separation between image and reality and really capability to govern a major state.
Right. Eva, a total of a record number of 15 candidates are taking part in the election this time. Have there been as many contenders in a presidential race in your country?
Yes, I'm not sure how many there are exactly, but around between 10 and 15 candidates too. Now, I would like to talk about the debate on TV. We had in France a debate that only invited the 5 main candidates. And that raised a debate actually among French people whether this was fair to exclude I believe it's 11 candidates total, so to exclude the 6 remaining so-called small candidates or not. And I wonder if Korea, because the campaign is so short, because there is a lack of time, whether Korea would not be advised to have one debate with the 2 main candidates, naming Moon Jae-in and Ahn Cheol-soo. I'm wondering if that's something that should be considered.
I see. Korea was originally scheduled to hold its presidential race in December, but following the impeachment of President Park Geun-hye, the date was pushed up to early May. Do you suppose, Frank, this will affect the result of the presidential race this time around?
It might prevent sort of a lot of information, previous information, to be dug up and to have perhaps a little bit more concentration on what is being said and what is being done by the candidates now. What tends to happen in elections over long periods of time is a whole bunch of baggage of the candidates, their previous sort of scandals or history is brought up and sort of regurgitated and cycled through the press a lot. There's really not enough time, I think, to do that. On the other hand, there could be some explosive information that comes out that doesn't have an opportunity to really get fully explained or explored in the press before the election. So you could have some, scandal happen just before the election because it's such a short period and have a greater impact on the election. I think we'll have to look at what happens over the next 2 weeks to answer the question of the influence of such a short sort of campaigning period.
Right. And speaking of that, the candidates also did not have too much time to prepare for this race. Do you suppose the shortened campaign period will affect their chances of securing the top post?
I really think it's the fundamentals of the race that affect the outcome a lot more than the individual personalities or even the sort of time that people are allowed to run. The fundamentals here are that there's a lot of unhappiness with the previous administration, especially after the way it went down. And so it was inevitable, whether it was going to be a long campaign or a short one, that a center-left or a more liberal candidate would likely win. So I think that doesn't change.
Right. A recurring problem during elections, everywhere worldwide, is the issue of negative campaigning. Now, what are your thoughts on this phenomenon here in Korea?
In South Korea, because there's so much emphasis on social networking and that type of spread of information, I think it's quite tempting for the candidates to engage in that type of thing. And I think, some of the candidates certainly have been in trouble for that type of behavior before, for their use of social networking to spread sort of so-called fake news. But that's something that I think definitely we'll see in this election as we move closer to the voting date.
So negative campaigning can, to a certain extent, have an impact, a positive impact for the person who's engaging in it.
The research shows that it drives down the numbers for the opponent. So it doesn't necessarily drive up the numbers for the candidate, but all you have to do really is edge out your opponent. So if you can bring your opponent down without bringing yourself up, it's still a win, right? So, this affects kind of races towards the end and then when they're very, very close, but there's so many other factors that go into these things. Yeah.
Eva, a key phrase during elections in Korea is the phrase regional animosity. Is there a similar divide in voter sentiment in France?
Yes, definitely. We have some regions that are historically voting left, some other regions that are historically voting right. Paris typically votes left, and then inside Paris, some arrondissements, so some areas of Paris vote typically right or left. So of course that plays a role. And then sometimes in some election, just like in the United States, the swing states, right? We focus our attention specifically on those regions.
Right.
But I think really the generational divide is going to play a stronger role in this election. Some research I read that there are many voters between the 20s to the 40s that are going to have a very strong impact, and 55% of the electorate is in that age group. And that age group tends toward the liberal side, and then the older voters tend toward the conservative side. I think it'll be really, what will be critical is bringing out that vote. And how we see the demographics in terms of who actually got to the polls.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this presidential election really plays against a backdrop of the idea of Helchosun, right? This idea that, or the dirt spoon, you know, that some young people are born with dirt spoons in their mouths and some young people are born with silver spoons in their mouths. And this sense of a lack of social mobility. This frustration manifests itself most acutely in young people who are suffering from high levels of unemployment. And so this is, of course, tied into the notion that chaebol and government are too close together and sort of act as a revolving door. So all of these things are really kind of coming to a head, coming to a boil as we head into May 9th, which will be interesting to see if the frustrated classes, the frustrated generation, actually does mobilize and show up at the polls.
I agree with those divisions, both the geographical division and generational, but I think what we saw during the demonstrations every week, every Saturday demonstration, was also a sort of unity that emerged from South Korean society, and I think that might change a little bit the dynamic this time during that election.
Right, so it remains to be seen, right? In this next report, we explore the campaign pledges of some of the frontrunners and also take a look at the tasks that the new administration faces once in office. Candidates have thrown their hats into the ring for the 19th presidential election. Of them, 5 are considered the main contenders. Global news organizations have also been examining the top 5, dissecting their personal history and campaign pledges. A closer look at the campaign promises reveals the key issues in this race are jobs, national security, and welfare. Moon Jae-in has named job creation his top priority. Hong Joon-pyo and An Chol-soo have both emphasized national security. Yoo Seung-min has placed welfare programs for childcare and education at the top of his list, while Shim Sang-jung has placed political and chaebol reforms as her main priorities. But as talk of a US preemptive strike on North Korea continues to circulate, national defense has risen to be one of the top issues in this election, especially as fears mount about further provocations and potential nuclear tests from Pyongyang. US Vice President Mike Pence, who recently visited South Korea, said regardless of the outcome of the presidential election, Seoul and Washington will continue to uphold a strong security partnership.
While change is coming on May the 9th, the people of South Korea may be assured. Whatever change happens in your elections, the commitment of the United States to South Korea's safety and security will remain unchanged.
In light of these developments, leading candidates are also trying to paint themselves as the best leader for national security. Meanwhile, the Japanese government has been strongly demanding Korea's next administration respect the Seoul Tokyo Agreement on sexual slavery concluded under the Park Geun-hye administration.
韓国が政権移行期にある中で情報収集等一層力を入れ次期政権の誕生に十分備える必要があるということ。慰安婦像の問題については政府として韓国側に対し粘り強く合意の着実な実施を求めていく方針に何ら変更はありません。
But as the majority of the Korean public views the agreement in a negative light, it looks likely the incoming administration will work to renegotiate or scrap the deal altogether. Some of the other difficult issues the next government will have to tackle are Seoul's policy toward North Korea, the shuttered inter-Korean Kaesong Complex, and a military information agreement between Seoul and Tokyo. The next president of Korea will face no shortage of major issues immediately after taking office. Because of this, the Korean public is closely watching to see which candidate holds more promise for the country's future. Elise, I assume you've come across a couple of the articles that reveal the pledges made by these candidates. What pledge caught your attention, perhaps?
Well, I play to an American audience, and so our main concern, of course, is where these candidates stand on the North Korea question, on national security issues, on the US-ROK alliance. And so the line of sort of controversy that we're paying most attention to is on that, on the controversial US missile defense system that is partially deployed, I guess, here in South Korea. If I were to be a debate moderator, for instance, I would really want clarifying positions on that question.
Right. Eva, were there any pledges, campaign pledges, that you hoped to hear of but didn't? Like, for example, more interest in efforts to reduce air pollution? Or?
Actually, that's what I wanted to mention, and that's probably a selfish point of view from somebody living in Seoul and having kids in Seoul. That's one of the main worries, along with the North Korean threats, is the fine dust. And this has become a huge problem. I think the levels have increased, and we all noticed it in the past years. And I think the next president will have to tackle that issue and will have to take concrete steps and will have to also acknowledge that this does not all come from China and that a certain part of it is domestically produced, and therefore there will need to be measures taken about coal production and about renewable energies.
Right. Now, Frank, you talked about this earlier, but which voter bloc here in Korea do you believe, Elise, will play a decisive role in determining the outcome of Korea's 19th presidential race?
Still, because of past trends, I still expect older voters to be a big factor. I mean, these are the people who reliably show up. You can't really count on people who don't to necessarily swing an election one way or the other. So I would say the voters that have always voted, and then business interests always show up because they are so affected by public policy. So I don't think any of that changes. What will be interesting is if this race maintains its tightness going into the final days, and then that'll keep things exciting. I mean, that's what we like to see, right? We like to see a close race.
Right.
How many people involved in the candlelight revolution are going to show up at the polls? Because the people that she just mentioned are not necessarily certainly those people. And we've seen the candlelight sort of protests and demonstrations kind of wane a little bit as we get into the new year. Back in October, this is what, 6 months ago, it was huge. There were 1 million, 2 million people coming out. Now the demonstrations that they're having are a little bit smaller. So are all those people going to show up at the polls?
I agree. I think after the scandal, we could see two things happening. Either people wanting to vote because they feel like something happened and it's a historical moment and I will go vote and I want to change something after that huge scandal, or people getting not trusting anymore politics and saying they're all the same and what's the point of voting anyway. I think it could go in both directions and we could see a higher voter turnout or a lower. I can't predict that.
One interesting statistic that I saw was a survey done of young people about their confidence in having an effect on the political system, their feelings about political activism. And it had really reversed. They were like 30% disagreed that they could make any difference in politics, about a year ago, and then recently it was more like closer to 70% felt that they benefited and that they could make a difference if they became politically active. And I think that's a result maybe of the candlelight demonstrations, but those people need to show up on May 9th.
And I think one of the main questions will be also who will the conservative voters turn to? Because many of them won't want to vote for the Conservative Party, but what percentage of them will turn to Ahn Cheol-soo? What percentage of them won't vote? I think that will be one key factor in the results.
Right, that is true. Frank, like we just saw in the report, among the many issues that the new administration needs to tackle, we have the issue of THAAD, we have North Korea's continuous nuclear ambitions. Which issue needs to be tackled immediately, in your opinion?
Well, I think they need to deal with the scandal, the Park Geun-hye scandal. And it'll be very interesting now. You know, the prosecutor's office has kind of had a honeymoon in that it's been free from any sort of political concerns for a few months now. Is that going to carry on in the next administration, and how are they going to deal with the responsibility of following through on the expectations of the public in terms of bringing all of those people, the business and government people involved in that scandal, to account? I think that's a really important part of this election, and the mandate that will be expected of that government to end the collusion and corruption that's involved between government and big business in South Korea.
Right. What changes, Elise, do you expect to see under a new administration? Let's suppose the new administration is a liberal administration. What are some of the changes we can expect?
I would expect a somewhat less hard line against North Korea. I mean, these candidates tend to be a little bit more pro-diplomatic means in dealing with this ongoing problem. But also, my hope, as somebody who is always fighting for more access, is that this administration is more in touch with what the people are looking for, which is, like you mentioned, more transparency, more being out there among the people to find out what problems are going on, and not traveling abroad to junkets in Colombia or the UAE, wherever Park Geun-hye was constantly traveling. And so hopefully this new administration is one that cares a little bit more about domestic issues and seems to show it.
I see. Do you suppose a new administration might also signal the start of work in the Inter-Korean Industrial Complex, Frank?
I think that's a tricky issue. You know, I think the South Korean public is quite divided over that. I know that if Moon Jae-in is elected, they are considering restarting the Kaesong Industrial Complex and even tours to Mount Gumgang. You know, my feeling is that I'm a believer in engagement, and through engagement, change can come about with North Korea. What'll be very interesting, again, if Moon is elected, is how he's going to balance his desire to increase engagement with North Korea and enter dialogue with North Korea and take the lead in relations with North Korea, when you have a very different hawkish policy coming out of Washington. And South Korea is going to have a struggle on its hands to sort of take over its own relationship with North Korea with, again, a different policy from the United States.
Right. Okay, now this will probably be my final question, but given the challenges that Korea faces, both at home here and abroad, Eva, what kind of leader do you suppose the Korean public is looking for? What quality should the next president have?
Well, I think we have to realize that Korean people are longing for changes. I think they really are fed up with corruption, and I think they want, above all, somebody who they can trust. I think they need to regain trust in politicians and in politics. So I would say somebody clean, and somebody, as Elise was saying earlier, somebody closer maybe to the people, somebody who comes out and somebody who meets people and listens to their needs, somebody who tackles the economic issue. We haven't talked about that so much, but youth unemployment is rising, and I think this is a major concern for all the Korean young people. Those would be some of the main issues.
Right. Elise, what are your thoughts?
So I would say a unifying president will be really important because this has been a very polarizing time for South Korea, and Koreans are largely divided among lots of different lines. And so if the new president can come in and speak to some issues that all Koreans care about, or act as a president for all Koreans instead of just his or her own political party, I think that can be a strong start to showing competence and sort of caring about governance, not just for one side or one point of view, but for everyone.
Right, it is. Well, that's all the time we have for today. As always, thank you for watching and see you again next time.